Yo, boys, welcome back. Welcome back. Another video by Perry. Today, we're going to discuss what if Russia reinvaded every former Soviet country? This is so. Russia decides, you know what? We want to reform the Soviet Union. Let's go crazy. Let's take it all. And they just declare war on all the former Soviet nations. That's all the lawyer you know. Alright? So, with that being said, let's just get right in it. Alright, so Russia's strategy for this is going to be a combination of picking off like one at a time, and also trying to hold defensible borders. So in the Caucasus, they have the Caucasus Mountains, which is good defense against these guys. So they're not really going to focus on pushing here early on. They're going to be more focused on Central Asia and Europe, which are a little more easier to invade. Also, we should probably know there's kind of a war going on here, so let's just ignore that and say that this fictional war happened before this war, the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war hasn't happened yet. Russia just occupies the territories it's already occupied. So, yeah. Alright, so we're going to see Russia perform a few offensives here. Their first goal will mainly be to try to humble Eastern Europe, which is probably the strongest bloc, as well as maybe try to take some buffer ground against Kazakhstan. And again, like I said, they're going to try to use the fact that the Caucasus is defensible to mostly ignore that. So, alright, so Russia begins its first push in the north, in Estonia, pushing up to Tallinn, and they also started pushing to Latvia and Belarus to try to make it to Kaliningrad. And this push, it goes decently well, but there is some forest here, so Russia's invasion is a little halted, but the Baltic states are pretty weak, so it's not halted that much. Meanwhile, Lithuania tries to rush Kaliningrad, but it's going to be pretty hard. They get the country side of Kaliningrad, but the actual military part, it's pretty firmly Russian. They also start the offensive into Belarus. They encircle this little borderland, which encircles some troops on the border, and then begin just a general trend toward Minsk. Lastly, there's the Ukrainian invasion. This one you would expect to be the easiest because of the flat land. And we sort of see a repeat of the Ukraine where they push up from Crimea, and they actually take a good amount of land down here. But the push to the capital itself, for the most part, gets halted pretty quickly, especially without help from Belarus, like in the actual war. And this is kind of a problem, since this is where most of their troops was in the Ukraine offensive. And Ukraine is also, you'd expect Ukraine to be the easiest territory to push through, but no, Russia, while it makes some progress, it's not insane amount. And eventually the front line stabilizes, the push to Kyiv stops, and it just sort of becomes the actual Ukraine war. Alright, in Central Asia we see some of the Russian military push out, although they're not really fighting anyone, since most of this land is just majority Russian anyways. And the Kazakhs have not yet properly mobilized a front line up here. So right now Russia's kind of just gaining a buffer, and there's not too much active fighting here, because again the front line is just so huge, and they haven't properly mobilized yet, either side. And in the Caucasus, like I said, Russia is going to be ignoring this area, so we're actually going to see some pushes here. The Dagestanis, Dagestan, Chechnya, both regions rise up against Russia, take this chance to rise up again, and in combination with Georgian and Azerbaijani forces, we actually see a good push by the Caucasus allies here, which does put some pressure on the Russian south, but it's there's only so much they can do. Eventually, they too just get halted down here, taking the mountain territories. Georgia also occupies Stochi, I think this is. Yeah, something like that. Georgia also occupies that, and just starts moving a little bit on the Russian coast. But it's not going to be so simple for them. Alright, so back to Europe. We're kind of just going to bounce around here. Back to Europe. Russia continues pushing to the capitals. Eventually, they reach the border of Tallinn. I think Tallinn was like right here. And they keep on pushing. But the Estonians put up a decent defense of the city. As we know, Russia's not the biggest, baddest bear. So this is gonna take a bit. Still, the push to Riga still occurs with Russian armored corps trying to spearhead over there. And again, sort of the same pattern. They make good progress, get halted. So instead, they decide to move around Riga, and they eventually reach the Baltic Sea. And the point is to try to cut off Latvia from Estonia, so they can take out Estonia first. And still down here, Lithuania hasn't taken this yet. It's going to take a while for that. And Belarus, kind of the same thing, just gets invaded here. Although, not as much. Russia isn't nearly as focused on this. Similarly, Ukraine is also kind of stalemated right now. In fact, they even pushed back a little bit from Russia's early offensives, as Ukraine is mobilizing more men, because I think Ukraine actually outnumbered Russia in the early war, just because they enabled conscription. So yeah, the Ukrainian army, they were ready for this. They're no pushover, and Russia's not going to have a field day in Ukraine. The fields of Ukraine, stay with Ukraine. Now for Kazakhstan, Russia still pushes in the areas which Kazakhstan hasn't quite reached yet, but as the Central Asian nations begin to mobilize, they make a plan to sort of damage Russia, and that's to actually push up and try to cut off the Trans-Siberian Railroad right here. And they actually have a good success with this, as a Kazakh, Uzbek, like all these guys, they all move up, and they actually do reach it, and they do some damage to it. They sabotage the railway. Well, that's not too devastating for Russia, as the Russian army eventually does arrive. They were still surprised by this push, which is why it was so successful. But yeah, it's gonna get pushed back, and while this will damage Russian supply lines a bit, it's not a disaster for Russia particularly. And as for here, it's still mostly stalemate. Georgia will probably push a little bit more, but yeah. Now we have Russia again pushing out from Estonia, pushing in the Estonian nation, and just consolidating more ground basically. Now that Estonia is isolated, it's going to be hard to win. But the Latvians and Lithuanians actually do make a decent counteroffensive, creating some spearheaded and threatening to encircle some Russian troops. Although, because how weak these nations are, they're unable to close the encirclement, and the Russians just get out. And eventually they consolidate around the river here. I know there's a river here because Roy 4. Then we also see a dual Russian offensive as Russia creates a plan. Actually, other than that, still mostly a stalemate here. Yeah, Russia is focused mainly on Estonia right now, and then they're gonna deal with the Ukrainians. So in the meantime, Ukraine tries offensives. They just keep trying to liberate some lands over here in the Donbass area. And while it goes alright, it's still mostly under Russian control. Um, Same thing up here in Belarus. Again, it's mostly a stalemate. Russia, since they're not having too many troops here, we see the Kazakhs also push back a little bit in the west of their nation, particularly around the coast. And they also try to push into friendly Tatar lands, which is around right here. I actually don't think the Tatars live there. I think they live like a little deeper, but we'll just say they live right here. Some Tatars. And again, they're trying to push Russia where it hurts. With decent success. Although the Russians keep pushing in the north, which does actually have a majority Russian population. And so they will be mostly loyal to the Russian invaders here. Yeah, we'll just say that. Alright, in Russia, they eventually besiege Tallinn, and they eventually just take it, because let's be honest, Estonia is not lasting. I guess Estonia would flee the islands. Right, no, gotta fix that. I guess they flee to the islands. Yeah. And Russia starts planning a new offensive in Ukraine, which you will see in just a minute. And they could actually do two things. They could try to push the Baltic more, but there's some pretty strong defenses in this area, put up by the Lithuanians and Belarusians. So they decided to take out the biggest nation of them all, Ukraine, which is you're gonna see. But before that, they keep pushing against the Tatars. Eventually, with a pretty decent defensive for themselves. They mostly push the Kazakhs out of Russia proper, although they're not really pushing anywhere here, because again, the front's so big, and they're not too worried here. They're worried on Eastern Europe. And eventually, both sides concoct a plan to figure out how they're going to win the war. And you're going to see this now. Also, the Kazakhs push a little bit more here. Eventually, again, mostly just easing out the front lines. Alright, so Russia's plan we're going to see first enacted, which is going to involve a revolt in Transnistria, because remember, Moldova is in this war. And with most of Moldova's troops on the front lines, they were surprised to see the full-scale revolt. And Russia actually was able to sneak some troops in here. And they combined this with an offensive from the south, pushing Ukraine off the river. And their point is to try to cut off and eventually even take Odessa. So they push out. Ukrainian and Moldovan divisions do surround in, but eventually this little pocket here connects to the Russian push. And while this is a little unstable, they do stabilize and they do reach here. And Moldova itself, there's heavy fighting all over Moldova. It's not going so great. Russia should also mention the West is probably supplying these nations too, which might make them do a bit better. So Russia won't just curb stomp everybody. And Russia pushes in the north as well. Actually, And so with that connection, now we're going to see what they do in a bit, but right now they got to stabilize, they got to recover supplies, and they also push out a bit, again, just to secure themselves. Now for these guys' plans to win the war, the blue team, the resistance, they make a plan, starting out with an offensive here, and they eventually start pushing around Astrakhan, which looks something like this. And their plan is to try to roll down southern Russia and connect to the Caucasus. Big ol' offensive. The armies of all the Central Asian nations are a part of this. And it actually also turns out to be successful, as the Azeris and the Mountain Resistance and Armenians and Georgians, they all meet up down here, and they all begin a push in southern Russia, as Russia really did not defend this region properly. Because again, the front's so big that the offense, they could sort of just concentrate on one area and then push. Russia, to relieve some pressure, they decide to make an invasion through the north of Kazakhstan, with moderate success. Because they had to, also the Kazakhs and the Central Asians had to loosen up that front line after spending on this offensive. Yet they still don't quite make the gains necessary for it to make that meaningful of a difference. Because again, Kazakhstan is just so flippin' huge. And most of Kazakhstan, I think, is like down here anyway. Yeah, this is like the heart of Kazakhstan. It's in this area. So this doesn't matter all too much. What does matter, though, is we're going to see the siege of Odessa. So eventually Moldova folds. The Moldovan army still continues to fight, but most of their country is occupied and split, and the Ukrainian navy basically just pulls off. In Enzig, around this area right here, Odessa. And normally this would fold pretty quickly because Russia's navy here, but actually NATO stepped in. And they actually are helping the Ukrainians continue to supply Odessa, which will mean that they will last for quite a bit longer. But other than that, Russia just kind of continues their push. They use sort of the unstabilization of the Ukrainian lines to sort of push around them. And they eventually cover most of Ukraine. Ukraine continues to hold out, although not particularly strong. Even here, in other areas of the front, Belarus really is not doing so hot, as Russia's just going all in on this, all in, ready to take down Ukrainians and restore the Soviet Union to the former glory. So these guys, they kind of realize that this game doesn't really matter that much. Gain the Caucasus, it matters a little bit, but they're not actually taking core Russian land, because Russia's most important land is in the north. They're not taking that, so they decide on something radical. The only way to win the war is the ultimate and final push toward the Rostov here. Rostov. And the point of this will sort of be that if they're able to take Rostov, or even Volgograd, that means that they can mess with the lines in Ukraine. Ukraine could push back and maybe make something happen. So an all-out offensive begins. They're just full sending right now. Georgia pushes in. They eventually reach Crimea, cutting it off, sorta. They can still move through occupied territory. And they begin to push toward Rostov here. Meanwhile, the center basically also folds. But the Georgians, but considering that it's Georgia and Armenia and Azerbaijan doing this offensive, there's really only so much they can do. As the battle of Rostov begins, which is actually gonna be ding dong. Surprise! It's gonna be a Georgian victory. Oh, sort of. They as this basically becomes the Stalingrad of the war, as Rostov sort of splits in half, as neither side fully takes the city, as it just kind of becomes a hellish ground for a little bit. And for the next weeks, Georgia occupies most of the city, although, yeah, the Russian army is coming. And while this does sort of work, Ukraine also makes an offensive down, trying to break out Odessa and cut off Moldova and eventually liberate Moldova. It's not looking like it's going to succeed. And Russia decides that in order to counter this, because they see this not going so well, they decide they do another massive offensive here in the center of the line. And their plan is again to re-cut off the Kazakhs from this area, which they try to do. They push down here, and the Allies do hold off decently well, but not well enough, while the center push begins to make very significant progress out and about into the Cossack territories, or historical Cossack territories, I guess. And when I think southern Russia, I think Cossack, okay. Also, because all these events, actually, this area is still mostly a stalemate. Kazakhstan, this is just sort of an endless back and forth. As the Kazakhs push up again, Russia's probably going to retake most of this eventually. The only part that they don't really recapture is the north, because Russians live there. And Russia's already resettling these territories. They're deporting Kazakhs, they're trying to make it Russian. So, yeah. Meanwhile, after several months of fighting, Lithuania does make decent progress in Kaliningrad, particularly taking the northern territory. And now it's really just the port left right here, which still represents likely most of the Russian military. Also, we should mention, too, Russia has complete naval supremacy, and they are able to continually supply Kaliningrad with forces because of that. But yeah, we see a race for offensives, and eventually we see two things happening. We see Ukraine both relieving Odessa for a little bit, and we also see Russia cutting off the Caucasus army here, and eventually they destroy this, and Ukraine attempts to destroy the Moldovan army, although here it doesn't go as well, as the Ukrainians are mostly unstable, and Russia kind of messed up letting them do this, so they just cut it right back. Eventually, Russia pushes out. They eventually cut this off too, and yeah, they get back on this line. And in order to ensure nothing happens again, they also ensure to use specialized divisions to push into northern Georgia to create a more stable mountain defensive line. Eventually, Odessa, after all this, falls. And eventually they also start reaching the outskirts of Kyiv itself. And eventually the writings on the wall. They could just pull off and just wait till the end, and we could waste another 20 minutes on this video. Or we could have a agreement made, as the U.S. really wants some peace. They really want peace, don't they? Russia, of course, says no, so you have the U.S. joining, And, no, we do not have the ocean turning blue. That sounds so stupid saying that out loud. And instead, we just have the U.S. nuking every Russian city to the ground. All of it, all of it. Volgograd to Vladivostok, all gets nuked. Because Russia refused to sign peace. And then you feel American power. No, I'm just kidding, of course. That doesn't happen. We're actually going to see a peace deal. Here, a modest Russian victory. So, yep, we'll see that now. Alright, so we sort of see a compromise, quote-unquote. The biggest losers are Eastern Europe. Lithuania, Latvia unite voluntarily under sort of a neutral zone or neutral nation. The Baltic Federation. Russia takes all of Belarus because it's culturally closest to Russia anyways. And Ukraine is pretty neutered. I actually think this might be a bit too harsh. I don't know how realistic it is to get all that taken. We still hold Kyiv though, which is nice. And I don't know the exact borders, and maybe Moldova like unites with Romania or something. So yeah, maybe we'll say that happens. The rest of Ukraine is again more of a neutral zone. Not under Russian influence. It's still under the Ukrainian government, but it's forced into a neutrality by here. And while Russia does have direct borders with NATO now, and Poland, it's still a pretty decent buffer they hold, since NATO's not going to be able to invade Russia through Belarus. Down in the south, we have the Mountain Republic being released, because, again, this was occupied for the whole war. They basically declared independence. And this is pretty much just Dagestan and Chechnya. But, in exchange, they do get Abkhazia, the Russians. And over here in Central Asia, most of the Russian majority lands in the north. I don't actually know if they are. I think they are majority Russian, but I'm not 100% sure. They get taken by the Russians. So still absolutely a Russian victory. And yeah, that's just it. Hope you guys enjoy this video, and see ya in the next one.